The security feed cut to static 3 seconds before the explosion tore through Dock 7. Cale Morin hit the deck as metal shrieked, and atmosphere vented in a howling scream that drowned out the alarms. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, sealing sections, trapping workers on the wrong side of twisted steel and fire. He rolled to his knees, ears ringing, and saw her through the smoke, a Velthran female clutching a datapad to her chest, her forearms trembling as she stood frozen in the chaos. Everyone else was running. She just stood there, mandibles clicking, and what he'd learned was their version of a prayer. The station lurched. Something in the superstructure groaned like a dying beast. Cale grabbed her upper right arm and pulled. She resisted, her compound eyes reflecting the flames in 1,000 fractured images. He didn't have time for gentleness. He yanked harder, and she stumbled after him, her chitinous legs scraping against the deck plating as they ran toward the emergency pods. Behind them, another explosion roared. The shockwave threw them both forward. Cale's shoulder hit the wall hard enough to spark pain down his spine, but he kept his grip on her arm. The pod bay doors were cycling closed, the automated voice counting down in 3 languages. 15 seconds. He could see faces through the porthole of the nearest pod. Human, Arcturian, even a Jaleth merchant who'd been haggling over ore prices an hour ago. All of them staring out as the door sealed. 14 people maximum per pod. They'd already launched. 10 seconds. The next pod was empty, its hatch hanging open like a mouth. Cale shoved the Velthran female toward it, and she scrambled inside, her legs folding in that unsettling way their species moved when panicked. He jumped in after her and slammed his fist on the emergency release. The hatch sealed.
The clamps disengaged.
The pod shot away from Station Meridian 9, just as the reactor core breached and turned 300 years of human engineering into expanding debris. Cale watched through the viewport as the station came apart in slow motion, pieces tumbling through the black like leaves in a wind that didn't exist. He'd worked there for 6 years. Everything he owned had just been vaporized. The Velthran female made a sound like grinding glass. Crying, he realized. Their species cried without tears, all clicking mandibles and vibrating thorax plates that resonated grief through the small pod. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. The emergency beacon pulsed red in the corner of the pod, broadcasting their position to any ship within range. Help would come. It always did in civilized space. The question was what happened after. The pod drifted in silence, broken only by her grief and the soft beep of the beacon. Cale checked the supply locker, water rations, nutrition packs, basic medical supplies, enough for 3 days if they were careful. He handed her a water pouch. She took it with one of her lower hands, the other 3 still clutching that datapad like it was the last solid thing in the universe. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented standard. Her voice was like wind chimes made of bone. "Cale Morin," he said, tapping his chest. She understood the gesture. Sivesh. One name, like most Velthran widows, they gave up their family designations when their mates died, became untethered from the hive structure that defined their culture. He'd read about it once, in one of those cultural sensitivity briefings that employers made you sit through before working near alien populations. Sivesh pulled up something on her datapad, her compound eyes scanning information he couldn't see from his angle. Then she made that grinding sound again, softer this time. Not grief. Something else. Fear, maybe. "My work," she said. "All my work. The contract. The payment. Gone." Cale understood then. The datapad was her lifeline. Whatever job she'd been doing on Meridian 9, whatever kept her fed and housed in a galaxy that didn't much care for widowed Velthrans, it had just ceased to exist along with the station. "We're alive," he said. "That's what matters." She turned all those fractured eyes on him, and he felt the weight of whatever she was thinking behind that alien expression. "Humans say that," she said, "but you have options. Hives. Families. Systems that catch you when you fall. I have this." She held up the datapad. "And now I have nothing." The beacon kept pulsing. The debris field from Meridian. 9 glittered in the starlight like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in the distance a rescue ship would be burning hard toward their position. But Cale was starting to understand that rescue and salvation weren't the same thing.
"Not for everyone."
He'd pulled her out of the fire. But the fire was the easy part. What came after was where people like Sivesh learned whether the galaxy had any mercy left in it. And from the way she held that datapad, from the resignation in her clicking voice, she already knew the answer. The rescue ship arrived 18 hours later, a bulk freighter called the Iron Providence that had been hauling grain to the outer colonies when the distress call reached them. They pulled in 47 pods, each one packed with survivors, who stumbled into the cargo bay with shocked pale faces and shaking hands. Kale helped Sivesh out of their pod, steadying her when her legs buckled from 18 hours of zero drift. A medic scanned them both with a handheld unit, nodded, and moved on to the next survivor. No injuries worth treating. They were processed like cargo, names recorded, emergency ID chips issued, assigned to a section of the hold that had been cleared for temporary housing. Someone handed Kale a thermal blanket and a meal pack. No one handed anything to Sivesh. She stood beside him, her forearms wrapped around herself, watching as humans helped humans, as the few other alien survivors clustered together in their own groups. The Velthrans were a recent addition to the galactic community, only 30 years since first contact. There weren't many of them out here in human space, and the ones who came were usually part of hive delegations, protected by their family structures. A widow traveling alone was an anomaly. An uncomfortable one. Kale tore his meal pack in half and offered her the protein bar. She took it with her lower left hand, mandibles clicking softly. "You keep helping me," she said. "Why?" He shrugged. "Why not?" She didn't answer, just turned that compound gaze on him like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. They found spaces on the floor among the other survivors. The hold smelled like unwashed bodies and recycled air. People talked in low voices, sharing stories of the explosion, of who they'd seen die, of what they'd lost. Kale listened to a woman 3 meters away explain how her daughter had been in the nursery section when the reactor went. Her voice never wavered. Shock did that sometimes, turned grief into something flat and factual. Sivesh pulled out her datapad and began scrolling through files. Kale watched her work for a while before asking, "What are you looking for?" "Anything I can salvage," she said. "I had contracts. Research data, 3 years of metallurgical analysis for the mining consortium. All stored on Meridian 9 servers." She made that grinding sound again. "All gone now. The backup protocols were supposed to sync to the cloud network every 6 hours, but the explosion happened during a maintenance window. I lost 16 hours of work. 16 hours that represented the completion milestone for my payment." Kale did the math. "They won't pay you for incomplete work? Would you?" She didn't say it cruelly, just stated it as fact. "The contract specified deliverables. I cannot deliver. Therefore, no payment. Therefore, no credits for food, for passage, for shelter when we reach whatever station agrees to take us." She turned back to her datapad. "I am trying to reconstruct what I can from local files, but without access to the full dataset, it is incomplete, useless." Kale thought about his own situation. He'd been a structural engineer on Meridian 9. Decent pay, decent benefits. His savings were in a bank on New Caracas, accessible from anywhere with a network connection. He'd lost his tools, his personal belongings, his apartment, but he hadn't lost everything. He could find work. Engineers were always in demand. But Sivesh? He'd heard the stories. Velthran widows struggled to find employment outside their hive structures. Something about trust networks and guaranteed loyalty that human employers didn't understand or didn't care to accommodate. They wanted workers who fit into established systems, not aliens who needed special consideration. "What kind of metallurgical analysis?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprise evident in the way her antennae perked forward. "Stress fracture patterns in titanium carbide alloys under extreme temperature variance, specifically for deep core mining operations where traditional analysis methods fail due to quantum tunneling effects at the molecular level." Kale blinked. "That's extremely specialized." "Yes, which is why the consortium hired me, which is why no one else will." She went back to her datapad. "Velthran's sensory organs can perceive molecular structures in ways your instruments cannot. We see things you must measure. But that advantage means nothing if the work is incomplete." An idea was forming in Kale's mind. Probably a stupid idea, the kind that got people into trouble, but he'd already pulled her out of an exploding station. In for a credit, in for a fortune. "What if you could complete it?" he asked. "What if there was a way to recover the data?" Savash's mandibles stilled. All 4 of her eyes focused on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "The servers are vapor," she said. "Even if fragments survived, we are on a grain freighter heading toward Talus Station. By the time we arrive, the debris field will have dispersed across thousands of cubic kilometers. Recovery would require specialized equipment, time, and authorization I do not have. But if someone could get it, Kale pressed. If someone had the connections, the resources, would it be worth it? She studied him for a long moment. Why would anyone do that for me? It was the same question she'd asked before, different words. Kale didn't have a good answer then, and he didn't have one now, except that watching her sit there clutching her datapad like a lifeline bothered him in a way he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was seeing someone fight so hard for something that seemed so small, 16 hours of work, a handful of data that meant the difference between survival and destitution. Maybe it was knowing that the galaxy was full of people who fell through the cracks and everyone just stepped over them like it was inevitable. Let me worry about why, he said. You just tell me if it's possible. Savacious thorax plates vibrated softly. Thinking, he guessed. Then she pulled up a schematic on her datapad, showing the layout of Meridian 9's data storage systems. The primary servers were here, she said, indicating a section near the core. Definitely destroyed. But there were redundant backup nodes distributed throughout the station's superstructure. If any section survived intact, if the nodes weren't completely vaporized, there might be recoverable data. Her lower right hand traced a path through the schematic. This node here, in the outer ring. It was scheduled for maintenance, which means it was isolated from the main network. If the explosion propagated from the core outward, there is a possibility, small but non-zero, that this section survived the initial blast and separated relatively intact. Kale leaned closer, studying the schematic. How small a possibility? 20%. Maybe less. She looked at him, and something in those fractured eyes had changed. Hope, maybe. Dangerous thing, hope. But even if we could locate it, even if we could retrieve it, we would need authorization. The consortium owns that data. Taking it without permission would be theft. The consortium just lost their entire research station, Kale said. I'm guessing salvage rights are going to be a mess for months, and you're not stealing data you created. You're recovering your own work. Savesh made a sound he hadn't heard before, sharp clicks that might have been laughter. You are either very kind or very foolish. Probably both, Kale admitted. But I know people. Salvage crews, data recovery specialists. I spent 6 years on that station. I know who owes favors and who might be willing to take a risk for the right price. He met her gaze. Let me make some calls when we reach Talus. See what's possible. Worst case, nothing comes of it. Best case, you get your data back and finish your contract. Savesh didn't respond immediately. Her mandibles worked silently, processing something he couldn't read. Around them, the other survivors had started to settle in for the night, arranging their thermal blankets into makeshift beds on the cold deck plating. The overhead lights dimmed to night cycle, leaving only the emergency strips glowing along the walls. Why? She asked again, quieter this time. Kale thought about lying, about giving her some noble reason that would make sense. But the truth was simpler and more complicated at once. Because I can, he said. And because no one else will. That seemed to satisfy her, or maybe she was just too tired to push further. She curled up on the deck, her legs folding in that insectile way, her forearms wrapped around her datapad. Kale stretched out nearby, using his thermal blanket as a pillow. Sleep didn't come easy. He kept seeing the station come apart, kept hearing that woman talk about her daughter in that flat, dead voice. Kept thinking about Savesh and her 16 hours of lost work in a galaxy that couldn't be bothered to care. Somewhere above them, the Iron Providence burned through the dark toward Talus Station, carrying its cargo of survivors and shattered lives. And Kale lay awake, wondering if he'd just made a promise he couldn't keep to someone who'd already lost too much to survive another disappointment. Talus Station loomed ahead like a steel flower, its 6 arms radiating from a central hub that held 500,000 souls from a dozen different species. The Iron Providence docked at the Refugee Processing Center, and Kale watched through the viewport as the bureaucratic machinery ground into motion. Forms to fill out. Statements to record. Temporary housing assignments. Emergency credits issued to those who qualified. He stuck close to Savesh as they moved through the processing line. Twice, clerks tried to separate them into different queues. Humans here, non-humans there. Twice, Kale refused to move, insisting they'd been podmates and had shared documentation that needed to be filed together. It wasn't exactly true, but the clerks were overworked and underpaid, and eventually they stopped arguing. Savesh noticed. She didn't comment, but her antennae tracked him constantly after that, like she was recalibrating her assessment of what humans were capable of. They were assigned to a temporary shelter in the lower rings, a converted storage facility with rows of bunks and communal facilities. better than the deck of a freighter, worse than anything resembling dignity. Kale claimed 2 bunks near the back and set up what little they'd been given. Sivesh settled onto her bunk and immediately pulled out her datapad. "I will begin searching for work postings," she said. "There are always positions for laborers, even if they pay poorly. I can manage on minimal credits until something better comes available." Kale didn't point out that something better wasn't likely to materialize for a Velthran widow with incomplete credentials. Instead, he pulled out the emergency network tablet they'd been issued and started making calls. First contact was Jessa Rain, a salvage operator he'd worked with on Meridian 9. She'd been off station when the explosion happened, running a recovery job on a derelict freighter in the Kessler Belt. Her face appeared on the screen, all sharp angles and suspicious eyes. "Moren, heard about Meridian. Hell of a thing." "Yeah. Listen, I need a favor." Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of favor?" He explained the situation. "The data node, the possibility of recovery, the tight timeline before the debris field became unsalvageable." Jessa listened without interrupting, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. "You want me to risk my ship and crew to recover data for a Velthran widow who can't pay," she said when he finished. "Just so we're clear on what you're asking." "She'll pay when the consortium reimburses her for the completed work. That's the whole point. If the data's recoverable. If the node survived. If the consortium honors a contract for work completed post-disaster. That's a lot of ifs, Morin." Jessa leaned back in her chair. "I like you. You're solid. But I don't run a charity." Cal had expected this. "What if I cover the initial costs? Pay your crew rate for the recovery operation? If we find the data, Sivesh reimburses me when she gets paid. If we don't, I eat the loss." You don't have that kind of credit." I do if I liquidate my emergency fund and sell the equipment vouchers they issued me." "You watched her process that. You're talking about spending everything you have on a maybe." "That's not smart, Morin." "Smart isn't always the right choice." Something shifted in Jess's expression. She studied him for a long moment, then glanced at something off-screen. "The debris field is still relatively concentrated. We could get there in 6 hours if we burn hard. But I need authorization from Station Authority to conduct salvage operations, and that takes time I don't have." "What if you already had authorization?" Kale asked. "What if someone could expedite that?" "Someone like who?" "Let me make another call." Kale ended the connection and scrolled through his contacts until he found Marcus Venn, a safety inspector who'd been stationed on Meridian 9 until a promotion moved him to Talus 3 months ago. Marcus was the kind of bureaucrat who actually cared about doing things right, which made him either refreshing or insufferable, depending on who you asked. The call connected. Marcus looked tired, like he'd been awake for 30 hours straight. Probably had been station disasters generated mountains of paperwork. "Kale, good to see you made it out." "Thanks. I need a favor." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everyone needs favors right now. Get in line. This one's quick. I need salvage authorization for the Meridian 9 debris field. Specific coordinates, limited scope recovery operation. Jessa Rain's crew." Marcus frowned. "What are you salvaging?" "Data storage node. Personal research materials. Nothing proprietary to the station or the consortium." It was stretching the truth, but not quite breaking it. Marcus studied him through the screen. "This is for you? For a friend?" "You don't have friends who need metallurgical research data." Kale hesitated, then decided honesty might work better than evasion. "There's a Velthran widow who lost 3 years of work in the explosion. This is her chance to recover it and complete her contract. Without it, she's destitute." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You know I'm going to get audited for this?" "Probably. And you know that if you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it." "I'm not lying." Another pause. Then Marcus nodded. "Send me the coordinates. I'll authorize a limited recovery operation, 48 hours maximum. After that, the debris field gets classified as hazardous waste and requires full environmental protocols. Costs go up, timeline extends, becomes a whole thing." "Thank you both, thank me. Just make sure it's worth it." The call ended. Kale turned to find Sivesh standing behind him, all forearms hanging limp at her sides. She'd heard everything. "You are spending your emergency fund," she said, "for data that might not exist, for a contract that might not be honored. For me." Kale shrugged. "Like I said, I can, and no one else will." Her mandibles clicked rapidly, that grinding sound filling the space between them. Crying again, he realized. But different this time. Not grief. Something else he didn't have a name for. "If this works," she said quietly, "if I recover the data and complete the contract and receive payment, I will repay every credit. With interest. I will not forget this debt." "It's not a debt," Kale said. "It's just helping." Scifistories looked at him with all four eyes, and he felt the weight of cultures colliding. Human casualness meeting Velthran obligation structures that ran deeper than blood. "In my hive," she said, "there are no casual helps. Every action creates connection. Every connection creates responsibility." "You do not understand what you have begun." "Then teach me," Kale said. She didn't respond, just turned back to her bunk, but her antennae were vibrating in a pattern he was starting to recognize as something positive. Hope, maybe. Or determination. Or maybe just the first stirrings of something that might survive the fire that had tried to consume them both. Jessa's ship, the scattered light, was a marvel of improvisation and stubborn engineering. Kale stood in the airlock as they approached the Meridian 9 debris field, watching through the reinforced viewport as twisted metal drifted past in a slow-motion dance of destruction. Scifistories stood beside him, so still she might have been carved from stone. The recovery operation took 4 hours. Jess's crew deployed drones that scanned the debris field, matching fragments to the station's original schematics, searching for the telltale signature of the isolated data node. Kyle watched the progress on a monitor while Scifistories stood at his shoulder, her breathing creating strange harmonic patterns that might have been prayer or might have been calculation. "Got something," Jess's voice crackled over the comm. "Debris fragment Delta 77. Matches the structural profile of your node housing. Radiation signature indicates it separated early in the cascade, minimal exposure to the reactor breach." On the monitor, Kale could see the fragment, a section of superstructure maybe 3 meters across, tumbling slowly through the black. The drone moved closer, magnetic clamps extending, catching the fragment and stabilizing its rotation. "Retrieving now," Jessa said. "Cross your fingers." Scifistories' mandibles clicked softly. "We do not have fingers to cross. It's a human expression," Kale said. "It means hope for good luck. Hope is not luck. Hope is the refusal to accept predetermined outcomes." She watched the monitor without blinking. "But I understand the sentiment." The drone pulled the fragment into the scattered light's cargo bay. Jessa and her crew suited up and went to work, cutting through the twisted metal to access the node housing. Kale watched through the camera feeds as they peeled back layers of deformed alloy, exposing the armored case that held the data storage unit. "Intact," Jessa announced, and Kale heard the surprise in her voice. "The housing did its job. Looks like the shock absorption system kept the internal components stable. We're extracting now." 10 minutes later, they brought the storage unit into the ship's tech lab. Scifistories insisted on being present for the data recovery, and Kale wasn't about to argue. They crowded into the small space while Jessa's tech specialist, a Jaleth named Kirsch who communicated through translated chromatophore patterns, connected the unit to the ship's systems. The interface came alive. Lines of data scrolled across the screen in Velthran script that Kale couldn't read but Scifistories clearly could. Her antennae trembled as she watched. "It's there," she whispered. "All of it. The full 16 hours. The completion data. Everything." Kale felt something unknot in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. Or just the simple satisfaction of watching someone catch a break in a galaxy that didn't hand him out often. "Can you complete the contract now?" he asked. "Yes. I need 3 days to compile the final report and verify the analysis against the consortium's requirements, but yes, I can deliver." She turned to him, and her voice dropped to something so quiet he barely heard it. "You made this possible. You made this real. I do not have words in standard to express what this means." "You don't need words," Kale said. "Just finish the work." They returned to Talus Station 12 hours later. Kale transferred the payment to Jessa's account, watching his emergency fund drop to almost nothing. It would take months to rebuild it, maybe a year. But Scifistories had her data, and that felt like it mattered more than his financial security. She worked for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, subsisting on nutrition paste and water while she compiled her analysis into the formal report the consortium required. Kale brought her food and made sure she didn't collapse from exhaustion. On the 4th day, she submitted the completed work through the consortium's contract portal. Then they waited. Approval could take anywhere from a week to a month, depending on how backed up the consortium's review process was. In the meantime, Scifistories started looking for work, anything that would generate enough credits to survive. She was qualified for so much, but the postings all had the same subtle requirements. Must integrate with existing team structures. Cultural compatibility required. Previous employment verification necessary. All polite ways of saying they didn't hire Velthran widows. Kale watched her get rejected from 6 positions in 5 days. Each time her mandibles clicked a little softer, her movements became a little slower. On the 6th day, a message came through from the consortium. Kale was in the communal area when Savash's datapad chimed. He saw her freeze, all 4 arms going rigid. She opened the message. Read it, made that grinding sound that meant she was crying. Kale crossed the room in 3 strides. What happened? She turned the datapad toward him. The message was simple. Contract completed satisfactorily. Payment processed. Thank you for your service. The credit transfer notification showed a sum that made Kale blink. It was more than he'd expected, more than Savash had implied, enough to repay him twice over and still leave her with substantial funds. I can pay you back, she said. Now, immediately, with interest, as promised. Keep it, Kale said. Use it to find better housing, better opportunities. You earned it. No. Her voice was firm. All 4 eyes focused on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. You do not understand. In Velthran culture, debts of this magnitude create bonds that transcend casual acquaintance. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You risked your security for mine. This is not something that ends with simple repayment. Before Kale could respond, her datapad chimed again. Different notification this time. She looked at it, and every part of her went completely still. What? Kale asked. She didn't answer immediately, just stared at the screen like it showed something impossible. Then she turned it toward him, her mandibles clicking in rapid patterns he couldn't interpret. The message header made his blood run cold. Priority communication, Velthran High Command, Royal Household Designation. Kale read it twice to make sure he understood. Someone in the Velthran government wanted to speak with Savash. Immediately. Formal summons. Royal authority. What does this mean? He asked. Savash looked at him, and something in her expression had changed completely. It means, she said quietly, someone very important has taken notice of what happened here. And that changes everything. The royal envoy arrived at Talus Station 6 hours later aboard a ship that made every other vessel in the docking bay look like scrap metal. Sleek, elegant, with hull plating that shifted colors like oil on water. Unmistakably Velthran, unmistakably important. Kyle stood beside Savash in the reception area, feeling drastically underdressed in his refugee-issued jumpsuit. Savash had managed to acquire proper clothing. A formal drape that covered her thorax and was marked with symbols Kyle didn't recognize. She stood perfectly still, but her antennae never stopped moving, tracking everything. The envoy descended from the ship surrounded by guards whose chitinous armor gleamed under the station lights. But it was the central figure who drew every eye, a Velthran female who moved with such precise grace that even the humans in the area stopped to watch. She was larger than Savash, her carapace marked with patterns that denoted age and authority, her forearms each holding ritual positions that Kale's translation overlay labeled as honored greeting and formal recognition. She stopped 3 meters from Savash and spoke in their native language, a cascade of clicks and harmonic vibrations that made Kale's teeth ache. Savash responded in kind, her body language shifting into something formal and controlled. The exchange lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then the envoy turned to Kale, and he felt the full weight of her attention like a physical pressure. You are Kale Morin, she said in perfect standard, the human who assisted Savash when she had nothing. I just helped, Kale said. Nothing special. You are incorrect. The envoy's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. What you did was quite special, though perhaps you do not understand why. Allow me to explain. She gestured with one arm, and an aide produced a holographic display. It showed a complex genealogical chart, all Velthran script and interconnected lines. The envoy highlighted one particular branch. Savash is not simply a widow. She is the daughter bond of the 70th hive, 4th generation removed from the Queen Mother herself. Her mate's death occurred during sanctioned exploration beyond our borders, which should have made her eligible for royal support structures. However, due to administrative errors and the distance from our core territories, she was classified as unbonded and received no assistance. The hologram shifted, showing communication logs and official documents. She petitioned for review 3 times. Each petition was denied due to insufficient verification protocols. She exhausted her resources attempting to prove her lineage while simultaneously trying to survive in spaces that do not welcome our kind. When the disaster occurred, she had reached the point where many would have simply ceased functioning. The envoy's eyes fixed on Kale. You intervened, not knowing her lineage, not expecting reward, not following any cultural obligation. You simply helped because, as you stated, no one else would. This action reached the attention of the Queen Mother through channels I am not authorized to fully disclose. But I can tell you that what you did has significance beyond what you intended. Kale felt his stomach drop. I didn't do anything expecting recognition from Velthrin royalty. I just saw someone who needed help. Precisely. The envoy's antennae vibrated in what Kale was starting to recognize as approval. Which is why your action carries weight. The Queen Mother has decreed that Savash's lineage be formally restored, her support structures reactivated, and her status within the 70th Hive recognized with full honors. She's been granted resources to continue her research and expand it as she sees fit. The hologram shifted again, showing Kale's own file. As for you, the Queen Mother has taken particular interest. You demonstrated principles that align with Velthrin honor structures, despite being human and having no cultural obligation to do so. This is rare. Valuable. The Queen Mother wishes to extend an offer? Kale's mouth went dry. What kind of offer? Employment. The Velthrin Collective is expanding its infrastructure development programs in partnership with human corporations. We require liaisons who understand both cultures, who can bridge the gaps that create situations like Savash's classification errors. You have demonstrated not only technical competence but also moral character. We wish to hire you as a cultural integration specialist, with full benefits, housing, and a salary considerably above human standard rates. Kale stared at the envoy, then at Savash, who was watching him with all four eyes. I'm just an engineer, he said, who pulled someone out of a fire and made a few calls. You are an engineer who saw an injustice and chose action over indifference, the envoy corrected. That is precisely what we need. The question is whether you accept. Kale's mind raced. He thought about his empty emergency fund, his lack of prospects, the temporary shelter bunk that would only be available for another 2 weeks before the station kicked him out to make room for the next wave of refugees. He thought about Savash, about how close she'd come to disappearing into the cracks, about how many others were probably falling through similar gaps while everyone just stepped over them. What would I actually do, he asked. Identify systemic failures in cross-species integration protocols. Recommend policy changes. Advocate for individuals who fall through administrative gaps. Work with both human and Velthrin authorities to create better structures. The envoy tilted her head. Essentially, you would do what you did for Savash, but with official authority and resources to make broader changes. Savash stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. You would also be working with me? The Queen Mother has requested that I establish a research facility here on Talus Station, focused on materials analysis for mixed-species infrastructure projects. I will need someone who understands human engineering principles and can coordinate with contractors. She paused. Someone I trust. Kale looked between them, the royal envoy with her formal bearing and the widow who'd been crying in an escape pod 2 weeks ago. This is really happening. Yes, the envoy said. Do you accept? Kale thought about all the reasons to say no, about the complexity of working between cultures he barely understood, about the responsibility of representing human interests to an alien government, about the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about Savash standing in the smoke, frozen and abandoned, about Jess's crew working through the debris field because someone asked them to care, about Marcus pushing through authorization because it was the right thing to do, about all the small moments of choosing to help instead of looking away. Yeah, he said. I accept. The envoy's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Excellent. We will arrange for proper documentation and orientation. You will begin in 1 week, after you have had time to settle your affairs and prepare for your new position. She turned to Savash. The Queen Mother also wishes to speak with you directly when circumstances allow. There are those in the royal household who would hear your story in full and ensure no others suffer similar classification errors. Savash bowed, a formal gesture that involved all 4 arms crossing over her thorax. I am honored to serve. The envoy and her retinue departed with the same formal precision they'd arrived with, leaving Kale and Savash standing in the reception area while other refugees and station personnel stared at them with open curiosity. I need to sit down, Kale said. Savash made that sound that might have been laughter. I have quarters now. Proper quarters. assigned through the royal household. You are welcome to visit. They walked through the station in silence, both processing what had just happened. Savesh's new quarters were in the upper rings, the kind of space that cost more per month than Kale had ever made in 3. Clean, spacious, with actual windows that showed the stars instead of reinforced bulkheads. She gestured to a human-style chair and Kale collapsed into it. "This is insane," he said. Savesh settled onto a Velthran resting platform, her legs folding in that unsettling but somehow familiar way. This is what happens when someone notices. When someone with power decides that injustice should be corrected rather than accepted. She looked at him. "You noticed." When no one else did. "Plenty of people noticed," Kale said. "They just didn't do anything about it. That is my point." Savesh pulled out her datapad, but this time she didn't look like she was drowning in it. "I have been reviewing the employment databases. There are 147 Velthran widows currently registered in human space. 73 of them are classified as unemployed or underemployed. Most have similar stories to mine. Caught between administrative systems, unable to prove lineage, ineligible for hive support, unwanted by human employers." She turned the datapad toward him, showing a map of registered Velthrans across multiple stations and colonies, each one marked with status indicators, most of them red or yellow. "Your new position gives you authority to investigate these cases, to identify which ones are administrative errors, which ones are cultural misunderstandings, which ones are deliberate discrimination, and you will have resources to fix them." Kale studied the map, feeling the weight of those 73 red dots. "I'm one person. I can't fix everything. But you can fix some things, and others will notice what you do and begin to fix more things. That is how systems change." Her antennae vibrated softly. The Queen Mother understood this when she made her offer. She is not just hiring you. She is creating a precedent, a model for how cross-species integration should function. The full scope of it was starting to sink in. Kale had pulled one person out of a disaster, and somehow that had cascaded into something much larger. It felt too big, too important for someone who'd just been trying to help. "What if I mess this up?" he asked. Savesh tilted her head, those compound eyes reflecting fragments of his own uncertainty back at him. "Then you will learn from the mistakes and do better. That is what growth requires. You did not know how to help me at first. You simply tried things until something worked. You will do the same in this new role." She paused, "And you will not be alone." "I will be here. The Queen Mother's advisors will provide guidance. And the 73 widows you help will remember what you did for them, just as I remember what you did for me." Kale looked at the map again, at all those red dots representing lives that had fallen through the cracks. He thought about the woman on the Iron Providence talking about her daughter in that flat, dead voice. About all the people who survived disasters only to discover that survival was just the beginning of a different kind of struggle. "Okay," he said. "Where do we start?" Savesh's mandibles clicked in what he'd learned was her version of a smile.
"We start with the one who needs help most urgently."
"Then we move to the next. Then the next. One at a time until the systems begin to change." She pulled up a file on her datapad, another Velthran widow, this one stranded on a mining colony in the outer reaches, cut off from both hive support and human assistance. Her name is Therix. She has been attempting to secure employment for 8 months. She has advanced degrees in quantum engineering but cannot find work because she lacks verification of her credentials. The hive that would verify them does not have representatives in human space, and she cannot afford passage back to Velthran territories. Kale read through the file. It was depressingly similar to Savesh's situation, just different details. Another person trapped by systems that didn't talk to each other, by cultural gaps that no one had bothered to bridge. "Do we have authorization to help her?" "You will, once your position becomes official. Until then, we can begin preliminary research and prepare recommendations." Savesh's eyes met his. "Unless you would prefer to wait until the bureaucracy processes all the proper forms." Kale thought about the 18 hours he'd spent in that escape pod, about Savesh clutching her datapad like it was the only solid thing in the universe, about how close she'd come to being just another red dot on a map that no one looked at. "No," he said, "we start now." They worked through the night, reviewing Therix's case, identifying the specific administrative barriers, drafting communication to the relevant hive authorities and human corporate offices. It was tedious work, nothing like pulling someone out of an exploding station, but somehow it felt just as important. At some point, Kale fell asleep in the chair. When he woke, Savesh was still working, her forearms moving in coordinated patterns across 3 different datapads. The stars outside the window had shifted positions. Station morning cycle was beginning. "How long was I out?" Kale asked. 4 hours. "I prepared nutrition paste if you require sustenance." She gestured to a food preparation unit he hadn't noticed. "I also took the liberty of transmitting our preliminary findings to the Queen Mother's administrative office. They responded with provisional authorization to proceed with Therex's case as a test of the new integration protocols." Kale rubbed his eyes. "You got authorization while I was sleeping?" "I do not sleep the same way humans do. I required rest periods, but they are shorter and less continuous." It made efficient use of time. Savash's antennae twitched. "I hope you do not mind that I proceeded without your explicit approval." "Mind? You just saved us 3 days of waiting." Kale stretched, feeling his spine crack. "What did they say?" "They are interested in our methodology. If we can successfully resolve Therex's situation, they will use it as a template for addressing the other 72 cases." She paused. "There is pressure to succeed. Many in the Velthran government are skeptical of this integration initiative. They believe cultural differences are too vast, that humans cannot be trusted to properly value Velthran individuals. Failure would confirm these suspicions." "No pressure, then," Kale said. "Only the future of cross-species cooperation resting on whether we can get one woman verified and employed. Easy." Sivesh made that grinding sound, but softer. Almost gentle. "You joke when stressed. I have noticed this pattern." "Yeah, well, it beats panicking." Kale pulled up Therex's file again, studying the details. "The verification issue comes down to communication protocols. The hive that needs to verify her credentials uses a diplomatic channel that requires security clearances we don't have. But if we can't access that channel, we can't get the verification. Classic catch-22. I may have a solution," Sivesh said. "Before my mate died, before I became unbonded, I held clearances for certain hive communication networks. Those clearances were supposed to be revoked when my status changed, but the process is often delayed due to administrative backlog. There is a possibility my access still functions." Kale looked at her. "You want to use potentially revoked security credentials to access hive diplomatic channels?" "Yes. That could get you in serious trouble if the access has been properly revoked. It could, but it could also resolve Therex's situation in hours instead of months." Sivesh met his gaze. "You risked your emergency fund for me. I can risk administrative censure for her." It was the same logic he'd used. Turned back on him. Kale found himself smiling despite the situation. "All right, but if this goes wrong, we're both going to have explaining to do." Sivesh accessed the hive network through a secure terminal. Kale watched as Velthran's script scrolled across the screen too fast for his translation overlay to keep up. She worked in silence, her mandibles clicking softly in what might have been concentration or might have been prayer. "Access granted," she said finally. "My clearances are still active. I am accessing the 73rd Hive's personnel records now." More scrolling text, then a pause. "I have located Therex's credential verification. Her degrees are legitimate. Her research is on file. Her status as widow is confirmed. I am generating an official verification document now." The terminal chimed. A document appeared on screen, marked with hive seals and authentication codes. "This will satisfy human corporate requirements," Sivesh said. "I will transmit it to Therex now, along with recommendations for employment opportunities that match her qualifications." Kale watched as she worked, thinking about how much had changed in 2 weeks. From being trapped in an escape pod to working late into the night helping someone they'd never met. From having nothing to having the resources to actually make a difference. "How many more do you think we can help?" he asked. Sivesh didn't look up from her work. "All of them," she said simply. "However long it takes, however many barriers we must cross. All of them." The terminal chimed again. Response from Therex, transmitted from whatever distant colony she was stranded on. Sivesh read it, and her entire body went still. "She is asking if this is real," Sivesh said quietly. "She says she has been waiting so long that she had stopped believing anyone would help. She is asking if we are certain the verification will be honored." Kale felt something twist in his chest. He thought about Sivesh asking him why he kept helping, about the desperation of someone who had been failed so many times they couldn't trust salvation even when it arrived. "Tell her it's real," he said. "Tell her we're certain. Tell her she's not alone anymore." Savash's fingers moved across the terminal, composing a response in flowing Velthran script. When she finished, she sat back and looked at Kale with all 4 eyes. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For teaching me that sometimes one person choosing to help is enough to change everything." The response from Therex came an hour later. She had secured employment with a human quantum research facility, starting immediately, with pay that would allow her to finally stop surviving and start living. Sivesh showed Kale the message, and he watched as another red dot on the map turned green. 1 down, 72 to go. And somewhere in Velthran space, a queen was watching, taking notice of what happened when someone decided to help instead of look away. The stars wheeled outside the window. The station cycled through its artificial day, and Kale Morin, who'd just been trying to pull one person out of a fire, found himself at the center of something that might actually change the galaxy. One widow at a time. One act of help at a time. Until the systems started to bend and the cracks people fell through began to close, and the galaxy became a place where no one had to face disaster alone.